The Bible tells us that Adam lived 930 years. But how long did Eve live? And who died first? According to the book of Genesis, Adam's lifespan is clearly recorded in Genesis chapter 5, verse 5. But the Bible never tells us how long Eve lived, not even once. So the question becomes, why would Scripture give us Adam's exact age at death, yet remain completely silent about Eve's? Was it intentional? Is it a hidden mystery? Or is the answer buried in ancient history and early Jewish traditions outside the biblical text? Today we will search through the book of Genesis, ancient Hebrew writings, and everything the public historical record preserves about the first family to uncover what may be one of the most overlooked mysteries in the entire Bible. Was it Adam or was it Eve? Who left this world first? Stay with me, because the answer is far deeper than you think. Before we dive deeper into this powerful mystery, welcome to my Bible Stories YouTube channel. If you love deep Bible discoveries, hidden truths, and spiritual revelations, then make sure you subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support helps this message reach more people around the world. From the very beginning, the world was nothing like what we see today. Before corruption, before sin, before the shadow of death ever touched the earth, there was Eden, a garden planted by God Himself, a place overflowing with life, beauty, harmony, and purity, perfect in every sense. Everything in Eden was alive, radiant, and untouched by decay. Nothing withered, nothing suffered, and nothing died. Into this perfect world, God placed His first children, Adam and Eve. The scripture says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 that God created man in His own image. Male and female created He them. They were flawless, without sickness, without weakness, without fear. Their bodies were designed to live forever. Their minds were clear. Their spirits were connected to God in a way humanity cannot fully imagine today. God gave them authority over every living thing, and in the midst of this paradise stood two unique trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They could freely eat from every tree except one. Only one boundary existed in their world, and God gave them a warning, direct, clear, and serious. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, the Lord said, "For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." This was the first time the word death ever entered the human story. But pause for a moment and think about this. Adam and Eve had never seen anything die. No animal had ever fallen, no leaf had ever turned brown, and no body had ever grown old. Death was a concept they had no experience with. It was a warning they could hear, but not truly understand. So let me ask you this question. Did Adam and Eve even know what death meant? Had they ever witnessed anything perish? Imagine trying to fear something you have never seen, never felt, never experienced. Death was a foreign word, a distant concept, a mystery. And yet, it was the one command they were told not to break, the only law in a perfect world, one restriction in a paradise full of freedom. But what would happen if they crossed that line? What would death look like in a world where death did not yet exist? This question hangs like a shadow over the beauty of Eden, a silent warning waiting to unfold. But the peace of Eden would not last forever. Somewhere within that perfect garden, a voice entered, subtle, deceptive, persuasive. The serpent, more cunning than any creature God had made, approached Eve with a question that changed the course of human history. He challenged God's warning, twisting His words, planting doubt where there had only been trust. Eve looked at the fruit of the forbidden tree. It was beautiful, desirable, and full of promise, or so it seemed. And in that moment of temptation, everything shifted. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6 tells us that she took of the fruit, ate it, and gave also unto Adam who was with her, and he ate. That single act, so small yet so significant, became the doorway through which death entered the world. But death did not strike them immediately. Their bodies did not fall. Their hearts did not stop. Instead, something deeper happened. Their innocence vanished. Their spiritual connection with God was fractured. And for the first time, fear, shame, and guilt were born in the heart of mankind. When God confronted them, He pronounced consequences that would shape all of human history. To Eve, He said, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, that pain and sorrow would multiply, especially in childbirth, and that the relationship between her and her husband would forever be changed. To Adam, God declared in Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 to 19, that the ground would be cursed, thorns and thistles would grow, and that he would survive only through labor and toil. And then came the final, unforgettable sentence, "For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return." This was the moment death began its work. Like a clock silently starting its countdown, mortality settled into their bodies. Every breath from that moment forward was one breath closer to the end. The first humans, designed to live forever, were now walking toward an unseen grave. Yet even now, a mystery lingers in the air. Though both Adam and Eve were sentenced to die, the Bible only records the age of one of them. Adam's death is clearly written, but Eve's is completely silent. So the question becomes, if death began its countdown for both of them that day, whose countdown was shorter? As the generations of humanity began to unfold, the scriptures recorded the years, the ages, and the lifespans of the early fathers. Each name carried a number, a beginning, and an ending. And when it comes to Adam, the Bible is unmistakably clear. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 5, the scripture says, "So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died." There it is, the exact age. Adam lived 9 centuries and 3 decades before he finally returned to the dust, just as God had declared. His life is measured, counted, and recorded for all future generations to read. But when we search for Eve, the mother of all living, the story changes. Her birth is recorded. Her role in creation is described. Her experiences in Eden, the fall, and motherhood are detailed. But when we look for her age, her final moments, her lifespan, or even a simple mention that she died, we find nothing. Not one verse, not one hint, not one record. The Bible is completely silent about the death of Eve, and this silence raises a powerful question. Is Eve's missing lifespan a clue or a mystery? Why would Scripture preserve the exact number of Adam's years and the years of his descendants, yet leave Eve's ending completely unspoken? Was it lost to time? Was it intentionally left out? Or does this silence reveal something deeper about her life, her legacy, or her place in the unfolding story of humanity? This absence in the text has puzzled scholars, rabbis, historians, and believers for centuries, and it opens the door to a mystery far greater than it first appears. Because when the Bible leaves a space empty, there is usually a reason. When the Bible leaves a mystery, people naturally search for answers. And throughout history, ancient Jewish writings and early Christian traditions tried to fill the silence the scriptures leave about Eve's final days. Some Jewish traditions, particularly those found in early Midrashic writings, suggest that Eve died before Adam. They describe her as passing away earlier, worn down by the sorrow of the fall, the pain of childbirth, and the emotional weight of seeing sin multiply through her children. In these traditions, Eve's heart breaks long before Adam's 930 years are complete. Yet other traditions, not biblical but ancient, tell a different story. Some claim Eve lived almost as long as Adam, surviving through centuries of raising children, seeing grandchildren, and watching the world grow beyond Eden. These accounts say she died not long after Adam, as if her life remained intertwined with his until the very end. None of these traditions contradict Scripture, because Scripture never gives us the details to begin with. They do not overwrite the Bible, they simply try to fill the silence left behind. They are attempts to imagine, interpret, or preserve memories that were never written into the holy text. But the fact remains, the Bible itself never says how Eve died, when she died, nor how long she lived. For the father of humanity, we have a number, 930 years. For the mother of humanity, we have only silence. So we must ask the question, why? Why is the mother of all living given no death record at all? Is it because Eve's story was meant to focus more on her role in creation and the fall? Is it because her death did not carry theological significance in the same way Adam's did? Or does her silence serve as a reminder of how much humanity lost the day death entered the world? Whatever the reason, Eve's missing ending is one of the most striking gaps in the entire Genesis narrative. A life so important, yet a death left unspoken. If we search for clues about who may have died first, we must turn to one of the most painful events in the early human story, the tragedy between Cain and Abel. The Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 4, verse 8, that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. This was the first human death in history, the first time blood touched the ground, the first time the horror of mortality became real. But imagine this moment not through the eyes of the reader, but through the heart of a mother. Eve had never seen death before. She had never seen a lifeless body. She had never witnessed violence. And now one of her sons lay dead, and the other was the murderer. For a moment, pause and picture Eve holding Abel's lifeless form, the child she had carried, the baby she had nursed, the boy she had watched grow, now cold, still, silent, a mother experiencing a kind of pain the world had never known until that day. Eve was the first woman to give birth and the first woman to bury her child. And after the fall, this moment may have been the deepest wound of her entire life. The weight of that grief, the sorrow, the heartbreak, could it have affected her years? Could it have shortened her days? Could the emotional burden of losing Abel have weakened her long before Adam's 930 years were complete? So we are left to ask, did Eve's heartbreak shorten her life? Because sometimes death is not only physical, sometimes it begins in the heart. To understand how deeply Eve's sorrow may have affected her, we only need to look at the world around us today. When a mother loses a child, something within her breaks. Doctors say that grief can weaken the heart, drain the body, and shorten life. Many parents, after losing a son or daughter, begin to decline emotionally, physically, and mentally. It is one of the heaviest pains a human being can experience. Now imagine Eve, the first mother in history, facing that same pain, but with no support system, no history to learn from, no other parent to say, I understand. She was the first to feel the crushing weight of grief, the first to watch death steal someone she loved, the first to realize that the consequence of sin had torn her family apart. Eve's grief was not just emotional, it was spiritual. Death was never meant to exist. The human body was never designed to handle sorrow, heartbreak, or trauma. These things were foreign to Eden, unnatural to creation, and devastating to the human soul. So we must ask, could Eve's emotional burden have taken her long before Adam? Could the intense grief of losing Abel, combined with the guilt of the fall and the pain of watching humanity fracture, have shortened her days? The Bible is silent about her final years, but her sorrow may speak louder than words ever could. After Eve disappears from the narrative, the Bible suddenly shifts into a new rhythm. Genesis chapter 5, verse 3-5 says, And Adam lived 130 years, and begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. But something is missing. Where is Eve? Before this chapter, Eve is always mentioned beside Adam. She speaks, she gives birth, she reacts emotionally, and she is part of the unfolding story. But from this point forward, the Bible becomes strangely silent about her. No mention of her age, no mention of her later years, no mention of her death, nothing. It is as if the text intentionally shifts the spotlight, and the silence itself becomes a clue. As Adam continues fathering sons and daughters for centuries, the writer lists only Adam's lifespan, but never Eve's. Why? Did she die much earlier than Adam? Was her death not recorded because the emphasis of Genesis 5 is on the male genealogical line? Or, more mysteriously, did something happen after Abel's murder and Seth's birth that marked the end of Eve's chapter? These questions lead us to a shocking implication. If Eve lived as long as Adam, if she remained alive through the birth of Adam's many sons and daughters, if she truly saw generations growing, why is she completely missing from the genealogy? This absence is not an accident. Ancient Hebrew writings were intentional, symmetrical, patterned. When something or someone disappears from the narrative, it means something. Before Genesis 5, the writer tells us everything about Eve, her creation, her naming, her childbirths, her emotional experiences. But once Seth is born, Eve's voice is heard one final time. in Genesis chapter 4, verse 25. For God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And after that, silence. The Bible never quotes her again. She never appears in another event. She never shows up in another moment in Adam's life. She never interacts with Seth, Enosh, or the generations that follow. She vanishes. This disappearance becomes even more striking when you consider this. Adam lived 930 years. That is nearly 1,000 years on earth. But Eve, his partner, his wife, the mother of all living, has no recorded lifespan at all. I ask, why is Eve missing from the genealogy if she lived long? Why does Scripture continue Adam's story, but not hers? The silence surrounding Eve becomes one of the most mysterious gaps in the entire book of Genesis. And this leads to the next major clue. Now that we have examined the clues surrounding Adam and Eve's disappearance from the narrative, we arrive at the most mysterious question of all. Who died first, Adam or Eve? The Bible never directly states who passed away before the other. But when we study the text closely, two strong possibilities emerge. Both are supported by Scripture, ancient writings, and narrative clues. Let's examine each possibility. Option A, Eve died first. This possibility has strong support based on the structure and silence of Scripture. First, Scripture stops mentioning Eve immediately after the birth of Seth. Genesis chapter 4, verse 25 says, For God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. This is the last moment Eve ever speaks. The text then shifts entirely to Adam's lineage and begins listing the ages of the patriarchs. No lifespan for Eve. No story for Eve. No scenes involving Eve. The silence becomes its own evidence. Second, several ancient Jewish commentaries suggest that Eve may have died much earlier than Adam. Some writings propose that the emotional devastation after Abel's death overwhelmed her, creating a shadow that Scripture subtly reflects by removing her from the narrative. Third, the emotional weight of the story supports this view. The death of Abel was not only the first murder, it was the death of her own child. Cain's banishment followed immediately. Eve lost two sons in one moment, one to death and one to exile. Some scholars believe this sorrow may have affected her health or lifespan, and so many believe Eve passed away earlier, long before Adam reached his 930th year. This would explain why Adam is repeatedly mentioned for centuries while Eve disappears completely. Option B, Adam died first. But there is another possibility, one rooted in early Christian writings and theological reflections. Some early Christian texts suggest that Eve may have lived into Adam's final years. Although the Bible does not mention her age, these writings imply she survived many of the tragedies of early humanity. Genesis chapter 5 verse 5 states, And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. This is the only confirmed death among the pair. But Eve's death is never recorded. This silence can be interpreted in a different way. Perhaps Scripture did not mention her death because its purpose in Genesis 5 was to establish the male genealogical line from Adam to Noah. Not describing her death does not necessarily mean she died early. It simply means she was not the focus of this particular genealogy. If Eve lived beyond Adam, she would have witnessed his final years, his final blessings to his descendants, and the closing chapter of the life of the first human. Some Christian writings portray Eve as living quietly among her children and grandchildren, watching Adam age, and eventually mourning his passing. Under this interpretation, Adam may have died first, and Eve, though unmentioned, may have lived for some time afterward. Now the question falls into the hands of the viewer. Which one do you believe based on the evidence? Did Eve die first, disappearing from the story because her chapter ended early? Or did Adam die first, with Eve's final years simply unrecorded because the text had shifted to genealogy? Your answer may depend on which clues stand out the most, but either way, the mystery continues. As we reflect on the story of Adam and Eve, there is a deeper truth hidden within the mystery of who died first. The first death in human history was not Adam, and it was not Eve. The first death was Abel, the innocent child slain by his own brother. Genesis chapter 4 verse 8 says, And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. This was the first life taken by sin, the first blood spilled, and the first human heart broken. The tragedy of Abel teaches us that death is more than a physical event. It is the result of disobedience, jealousy, and the corruption of the human soul. Here lies the spiritual lesson. Sin destroys relationships long before it claims bodies. Abel died, yes, but the real destruction began in the hearts of Adam, Eve, and Cain. Sin fractured trust, love, and the harmony God had intended. And this brings us to a question that transcends time. What is dying in your life today because of disobedience? Is it a relationship, a dream, a sense of peace, a part of your own soul? The story of Adam, Eve, and Abel reminds us that the consequences of choices ripple far beyond what we can immediately see. The first death was not only physical, it was spiritual, emotional, and eternal in its implications. Now, after walking through the Garden of Eden, witnessing the fall, and exploring the clues left in Scripture and ancient tradition, the question comes to you, the viewer. Who do you think died first, Adam or Eve, and why? We have explored the possibilities. Perhaps Eve passed away early, overwhelmed by grief and sorrow after Abel's death. Perhaps Adam died first, while Eve quietly lived into his final years. Both scenarios have compelling evidence, but the truth remains a mystery hidden in the text. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let us discuss, debate, and explore together. Your insight may help others see the story in a new light. And remember, in our next episode, we will dive even deeper into the early generations after Adam and Eve, uncovering more mysteries from Genesis that may change the way you read Scripture forever. So pause, reflect, and share your answer. Who do you believe died first, and why? Your voice matters. Your faith questions matter. Let's explore the Word together.